Again, going back to how those different systems connect to build a culture where people themselves send the message that it's not allowed, not a policy or a statement in the handbook, but that this is embodied. You may have your personal opinions, but in this capsule, we are this, and this is what we embody. And that creates a space where it has no room for hatred.
Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. Today, I'm very, very excited to have Loren Rosario-Maldonado on my show. Loren is a global HR expert with over 25 years of experience in redefining corporate cultures around the world. Her focus lies in leadership optimization and cultural intelligence. Loren, thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to hear your story. Your new book just launched, I heard, so I want to talk all about that. You've done all kinds of great stuff within the HR people space that I really want to get into. So, Loren, let's start with your story, because I'm sure you didn't just get out of bed and write a book, right? So tell me a little bit about the journey up to this point.
Wow, no, I did not just get up out of bed to do that. I came across cultural intelligence as part of my master's thesis program 5 years ago. And as you mentioned, up until that point, I was tasked with leading global HR teams I was working for a conglomerate, a multinational based out of Mexico. And I remember thinking at the time, I'm well bred, I'm a learned individual. And so taking this class, which was multicultural counseling, I felt like, it was a nice to have, but not necessarily expecting to learn everything I did. And as part of that class and my research, I came across cultural intelligence. And it was the first time that I was able to articulate all of the different experiences I had with foreign cultures, Latin America, Europe, Asia, in a way that made sense to me. When I started my career, I was focused heavily on emotional intelligence and leadership skills surrounding emotional intelligence. But when I started working with global teams, I learned that that was not necessarily enough. And a lot of the emotional intelligence perspectives that I was attempting to utilize fell short when building connections, deeper connections with not only people that I led, but peers and so forth and so on. And so that resulted in an extreme, very extreme identity crisis, because it was the first time that I realized I was culturally agnostic. And while I felt before that point that that was a positive, it was a negative in many ways, because not understanding enough about my own culture and my cultural values was creating biases that I never knew existed. And so, as a result of that powerful thesis and my professor encouraging me to do my dissertation and my doctorate work in this field, the more I shared my story, the more people pushed me to write this story, because it's something we don't talk about enough. We talk about the biases, but we don't talk necessarily enough about what contributes to those biases.
Wow, it's a big book we're about to open, right? Especially in a time where you and I spoke a couple weeks ago, and I think it is such a good timing for your book. It's such a good timing for us to have this conversation, because more teams, globalization is a real thing. I've never seen so many companies have so many different teams all over the globe. I told you, we're not a large company, yet we have people in 4 different continents.
Yes.
I mean, that's nuts, right? And I don't even know how many languages are spoken in and out of our offices. And understanding the different cultures is incredibly important for efficiency, for staying culturally, sensitive and all that stuff. Tell me, in your vast experience, how have you seen leadership styles evolve in this new global kind of landscape where everybody's all over the world communicating daily?
I feel like it's evolving more towards the human side. There was a period of time where leadership became very technical, very functional, And so we are going back to that human factor behind leadership because, to your point, we are a global society regardless of where in the world we are. Regardless whether your organization has a global presence, your vendors are global, your customers are global. And so you may have, which I think it's impossible these days, but you may have a homogenous culture and employee base, but the world in which they operate is global.
And this, again, is very timely because the world is turning to AI for automation and for, efficiency. And so that's becoming less human. So I think the only thing left for us as human leaders, especially, is to connect on a very, very deep level. It's the only thing that I think cannot be replaced by AI is that our ability to understand each other at a very, very deep level. And I think it sounds like that's where this is all headed, right? Why did you decide to tackle this? I mean, you mentioned you didn't quite understand your own world and all that, but what made you think that there was an actual problem beyond Loren, right? Because that problem you could have solved just internally. Why did you decide to tackle this very large world of neurodivergence and becoming the change, which is the title of your book? Tell me a little bit more about that.
That's a great question because at first, there was a lot of shame surrounding my story, right? How can I not know this? Oh my gosh, I can't believe this, blah, blah. But the more I told people about this story, it started with very close family and friends, um, expanding that story to people that I had just met, or whether at work or in my outer professional sphere with organizations I belong to. Everyone said the same thing. Wow, I never thought of it that way. Every single person said those words to me, which led me to think, if this is how they feel, how does the rest of the world feel? If this is how I'm feeling, what about my counterpart in London? What are they feeling? Or in Asia or in the Dominican Republic? Are they experiencing this? My family, if they're feeling this, how are their employers feeling? And because it's not talked about enough, or because it's embedded in more nuanced discussions like DEI, it misses it's kind of diluted, right? But
I agree.
there's that quote that says, and I apologize because I cannot remember who said it. It's you. In order to understand, you need to be understood, and in order to be understood, you need to understand. So that's really what propelled me to amplify my voice. And believe me, that took a lot of convincing, right? But to your point, there's a lot of things happening that have been brewing way before this year. And if we take pause and seek to understand, that can change the course of so many things. Not change the individual, but change the course. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to change anyone, but we do want to understand.
Tell me a little bit about what cultural intelligence is to you, and I guess I would say, what's the opposite of cultural intelligence?
Great question. I would say to me, cultural intelligence, the academic term is capabilities that help you work and understand and adapt with others who are different from you in a much more effectively, right? It's a framework. It has core capabilities with different dimensions, subdimensions that provide you with a toolkit on how to navigate those differences. What is the opposite of that is, wow, disconnect. I mean, it's telling you how you can understand someone who is different from you so that you can collaborate, communicate, coexist much more effectively. And so the opposite of that would be disconnect.
Nice. How similar is this to emotional intelligence, and what is the key difference?
That is the $1 million question that we are always asked, because emotional intelligence is more of that trending topic, right? Whereas cultural intelligence is now kind of emerging. It's only been around, the science behind it has only been around about 15-ish years, as opposed to emotional intelligence, who's been, in mainstream, if you will, for much longer. And the difference is, they're not mutually exclusive. If anything, you need both, because emotional intelligence is about self-management, self-regulating, self-awareness, right? And adapting yourself. Where cultural intelligence comes in is, emotional intelligence stops short at the homogenous environment, right? Your emotional intelligence, even if you are self-aware, is influenced by your own cultural values. And when you are interacting with others, it's important to understand their cultural values and how their emotional intelligence is influenced, if you will. So they go hand in hand. Uh, I would say cultural intelligence takes things a step further.
Got it. What are some of the challenges I guess leaders are currently facing in workplace culture, and how can they overcome them using this cultural intelligence framework?
Great question. I would say the number one challenge they're facing is how to preserve the human side behind their leadership skills while driving business results, right? While driving productivity. And where cultural intelligence helps is it enhances that employee value proposition, right? You're bringing engagement and empowerment through understanding, through collaboration and connection, which is what humanity is all about. It sounds simple. We all know as leaders it is not, particularly in this ridiculously fast paced world we live in. But what it helps you do is to take a step back and really assess yourself as a leader, understand yourself, your values, and how you prefer to show up in the world. And then take it a step further by helping your employees do the same, right? So we know there's a lot more challenges, technological disruption, business supply chain issues, also political disruption across the globe, you name it. But cultural intelligence is about, coming back to a place of understanding and using that understanding to take collective action.
So if I'm listening in and I'm driving and I want to immediately come up with three things that I want to do to become more culturally intelligent, tell me, what do they look like? What's step one, step two, step three?
Understand yourself, your own cultural values, how you prefer to do things. How is that tied to your history, your upbringing, so forth and so on? Second, I would say, you know, use that understanding to then connect with your employees, right? How is that influencing the way you lead your employees? And then third, use these two, combine these two to take action and continue to adapt your behaviors according to what you're learning. The more you learn about yourself, the more you can show up for your employees in a way that is not disruptive. It becomes natural because it's coming from a place of knowledge and understanding. So doing that will then motivate you to take more action and more action and more action. It's not an overnight, it's a journey, right? But the more you do that, the more you will incorporate, even if it's just baby step moves to connect better with your employees.
One of the things we do in our meetings that seems so trivial and so small and kind of silly almost is we ask, it's called segue. And every meeting starts with one personal good news and one, business good news. You would ask why the personal one. It's a business meeting. Who cares? And you understand so much from people's world by just hearing their good
Yeah.
news, right? They'll talk about their spouse, they'll talk about their kids, they'll talk about their personal gym, something, right? And you start understanding them. And when they can't come up with good news, they're struggling. it's a great opportunity to dive in and say, hey, you know, what's up? You seem stressed. You seem like you didn't have a lot of personal good news. What's going on? I never really understood why that was important. Another topic is years ago, I was part of a think tank called Vistage, and our chair would always try to connect on a human level. And we would say, Steve, stop, right? Like, I'm here to drive business, to learn from everybody and talk business. Don't get my family involved. But what I realized years later is until we understood each other on such a personal level, we literally cared on a personal level about each other, could we give great advice? I mean, it hit years later. Why do you care? Why are you so curious about our personal lives and all that? Let's just talk business. Let's bring in speakers. Let's look at our P&Ls, and all that is important. But again, until there's a deep understanding of each other's pain points, real pain points on lives and on our actual whys, we really didn't give great advice. We gave advice because we sounded smart or we had something to add, wanted to hear ourselves think or talk, but really until we understood each other at a deep level, it wasn't the same. So
That is fantastic. That's a great example. I talk a little bit about that in my book because that was me. You know, I kept thinking, why do they want to know so much about my personal life? I don't want to talk about it. I'm hyper private, don't want to talk about it. But understanding that there are certain cultures that, you know, connect and build trust based on that personal connection. So what you're saying completely resonates with me.
of course, that's awesome. Let's talk about the book. No more teasing. Let's talk about the book and what you're covering and why you chose to cover those awesome things.
I chose to cover those awesome things because they are often not talked about. These were the highlights. There are 10 cultural value dimensions, for example, but I highlighted the ones that really impacted me the most, the ones that the more I spoke to people were, you know, drove that aha factor, you know, such as managing time, right? Or communicating, building trust. These were things that really, you know, we talk about communication in leadership, but we don't really talk about what drives those communication patterns and preferences. And so the book highlights, you know, those nuances, and then it really gives readers just practical takeaways on how to improve, right? There's a roadmap, a playbook included where anyone, whether they are a named leader, an executive, to that individual contributor that is looking to grow, on how to practically apply culturally intelligent perspectives in day-to-day life.
Lauren, I'm visual, and many of my viewers, I'm sure, are. Do you have the book in front of you? You can
Of
show us.
course, yes.
And is this available? Is this available on like the Amazon store, or Libby, or any of those? Nice,
Amazon and Kobo, Kobo.
great,
Hmm.
very good.
Hmm.
We'll pick it up. We have a corporate account here. Everybody gets to pick books that they like and all that stuff.
Thank you.
Um, of all the years, can you share some insights into leadership development programs you've designed and their impact on corporate growth, and why you made those changes?
It depended on the organization I was with. I've been in various industries, from, you know, engineering to interior design, digital media, publishing, um, and telecommunications. How can I forget? It's one of the biggest ones. I would say every adaptation that was made was based on the business needs at the moment. I remember in publishing, when we were building the university at the time, we were very focused on presence, right? Uh, and helping. We had 50 states at the time, and so we needed to make sure that people felt a place where they could, you know, connect with others physically. But the leadership programs that we developed there were more oriented towards selling leadership. Think later on in my years, I focused a lot more on that human and uh, game changing leader, as I would call it, which is that leader is well rounded. It's not just talking about emotional intelligence, right? It's talking about really the psychology behind leading people, beyond communication, more so on the topic of how to team build through that visionary language, right? And interactive language as opposed to boilerplate cookie cutter type tools out there that just focus on a set of skills. But every single time, I remember at the Vista, which is a call center, we were heavily focused on engagement and motivation, right? And team building techniques because it is not only fast paced, but it is a very relational business and function, right? Mainly focused on the agent, how to enhance the employee value proposition from the lens of that agent. And so there was a lot of customer service embedded in the leadership development, as well as, self-awareness, self-management, motivating others, building trust. That was a big one. And so that's how each program would take the DNA of the organization, right? Because we can't really create leadership programs without understanding the business and what are the levers that are unique to that business in driving business results.
Loren, you've obviously heard of the Great Resignation, right? That happened right around the COVID timeframe. When companies went fully remote, there was a lot of cultural loss, I feel like, and companies are reacting to that by asking people to come back into the office 2, 3, 4 times a week, some 5. Those companies that still have remote staff, how do you recommend they keep culture alive? Because I feel like one of the reasons that so many people were resigning so quickly was because work was no longer a place. It was no longer a place where you built relationships, and there was no stickiness, right? If you don't know your boss and you haven't built a relationship, and you're just an email address and maybe a Zoom face from time to time, why do you care? You resign when you get a 5% raise somewhere else. I mean, that became the norm, or more flexibility, or whatever it was. I feel like so much culture was lost. What are some recommendations you have for companies that still have a remote staff, whether it's a secondary staff, meaning they have their corporate office and then have remote employees, or it's a remote first company? Like, what are some things you can do in a remote scenario to build culture and stickiness and team collaboration and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say culture has taken the biggest hit by becoming, 100% remote. And if you didn't have that stickiness, to your point, you were greatly influenced by becoming completely virtual. I would say go back to the basics, go back to that culture. Really assess that employee value proposition on what it is that you are looking to hold true as your culture, as your DNA. We like to use culture as a blanket statement, and it is certainly not, right? It's not a magic wand. There are all these different components that build a culture. One of them is leadership. One of them is psychological safety and trust in the organization, right? The employees trust in leadership. So I would go back to that basic and understand what is that culture that defines you. Where are your processes aligned with the culture you want to see? But are your leaders equipped to galvanize and cultivate that culture, right? Sometimes there's a disconnect between what the company says the culture is and what the culture really is. And so assessing that early on is very important because employees can definitely feel that gap. If you're an organization that promotes, work-life balance, let's say, or having resources for all, but employees are having to, work with very little resources and working around the clock, is that really sending the message that you do value work-life balance? And so making sure that your words match your actions as an organization. But that culture does not have to be articulated, it is embodied. And so in a virtual environment, we're talking here. We only met a week ago, and our connection was almost instant, right? Because we were talking to each other and we connected on certain points. And that's what employees are looking for. Whether you're digital or in person, that's what they're looking for. It's harder when you're digital because you can't really send, an emoji is not the same as giving someone a hug or a handshake, right? So it takes extra steps from leadership to cultivate that culture, but it's not impossible.
That's great. I agree. I agree. We've done it. At first, it was extremely difficult, and we always felt like our teams that were remote missed out on our culture, and we had to take very specific steps to include them part of the culture. Small things like when we had offsite events here or parties, then those teams would have to do the same, but together in some area where we would fly them all in so they can bond and do dinner, just like we would here. I think that was huge. And even if they
That's
were a team,
fantastic.
right? I mean, it's small things. Like we would
Yes.
say everybody in Armenia, India, Colombia, Brazil, you guys have to go and do an event together. Now, the biggest challenge was when it was a team of one. If it was a team of one, which we had very few, then it was, hey, you and your spouse go and have a team lunch. We had to come up with very creative things. I'll give the all the credit to my management team. That was their idea, but really got the teams feeling like they were part of something. Versus before, it was the LA headquarters show, and everybody else was secondary, which was very, very challenging to change, but we did it. Tech is evolving so quickly, and there's innovations daily. What are some of the innovations you see in HR that's reshaping the future of work, particularly in tech companies?
Whoa. Definitely AI. I know it's a hot topic, but it has definitely disrupted the way that not only HR does work, but how they view innovation at work. Because, especially in the tech world, we get so excited about new technology and how we can apply it to work. And AI has been one of those that we were, that employees were kind of slow rolled, if you will, from utilizing it completely because there are a lot of challenges to it, right? There are, copyright infringement issues. There are, other issues that can put the company at risk. And so explaining that to employees from an engagement standpoint, yes, it's definitely, it can be demoralizing for that employee. But I would say that AI is fueling other technology that, if it has not fully already, will continue disrupting the way that HR approaches talent management. Um, Talent acquisition is one of them, for example. A lot of companies had the great idea of utilizing algorithms and AI technology to select candidates, for example, which is a very dangerous thing to do when it's not utilized ethically, because you can unintentionally discriminate or prejudice against groups that you don't intend to, but the tool you have selected does so inadvertently. So that's a cause for disaster. Plagiarism is another one, right? Making sure that the organization is using these tools to produce quality and original work. And so I feel, is at the root of all of these different technologies that are coming down the pike. The other one is this fear around AI taking over jobs. And time again, I've seen it where I've been tasked to reduce staff, and I've had to push for upskilling and reskilling existing staff the most possible in order to preserve the intellectual property of the organization, if you will. But this is a way where HR has to balance, between being innovative while still being human centered, right? Because the intention at the end of the day is not to have AI employees, it's to use humans for what humans do best. That is connect, engage, motivate, and everything that has to do with the person, with the whole person at work. Is work being disrupted? Absolutely. But it's our responsibility, not only as HR, because we all know HR is one component of the organizational leadership, but it's leadership's responsibility to make sure that the teams are equipped to be upskilled. If the person hasn't been trained or developed in a year, that's already too long of time, right? How do we educate our employees in a way that they can not just adapt to new technologies, but thrive and innovate in spite of new technology?
Absolutely. This is great, Loren. I actually spoke on this topic last week in a university, but the whole concept is if you're not actively retraining your folks, teaching them AI, how to use AI, you're putting them in a category of dinosaur within 2-3 years, and they will be replaced, right? The way we're looking at AI here at Higher Cloud, we are actually injecting AI into our company, but it's solely to make people more efficient and to make them do the things that they love most, right? Which is thinking and problem solving, not filling out Excel spreadsheets, right?
Correct.
Or doing data entry. That's what I want to replace. I want to
Correct.
replace very, very kind of boring tasks that a machine should and can do without any bias, without honestly less mistakes than humans, and allow these folks to really use their God-given gifts, which is their emotional intelligence and their people skills and their problem-solving skills.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, and
That's
it's
great.
great that you mentioned that because, we always think about, I'm dating myself, but I used this example the other day. Do you remember Y2K? I
Yes.
mean, we thought the world was going to end, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone was
Mm-hmm.
preparing for Armageddon and da da da, and everyone prepared.
Yeah.
We prepared. And here we are with another innovative and disruptive technology, right? And it was frightening and people were scared, but if you prepared and you understood that well, you pummel through it. And also I see AI in any emerging technology. Immersive technology is another one, right? We're soon going to be doing this through immersive technology rather than Riverside or Zoom. And I think that's fantastic. How we grow and adapt to it is where our human innovation comes into play, right? This is how we bring this technology to life. You can't do that without humans.
I agree. There's the fluff component of diversity and inclusion, right? Which is to check boxes so you look great and get all this stuff that some of the bigger companies are doing. But what are some the key elements in actually building a truly inclusive culture that people can be proud of, and it was created organically and the way it should be?
You're bringing music to my ears because just like DEI could be a checked box, the approach needs to be no stone unturned. There are many different systems within the organization that need to be revised in order for you to be inclusive. You can't just put out that statement, put it in your handbook, create a little policy, and
Hmm.
everyone acknowledges it, and you're done. You can't just recruit, a diverse set, not just having women in technology, which you and I spoke is a challenge, but
Yep.
how are those women being empowered in the workplace? How are the systems in place there to support not just women, but members of all the other different dimensions of diversity? See, whether work-life balance programs or anything that supports women. And I will go as far as to say it's not that women are at a disadvantage, is that there are still outdated perspectives on what women bring to the table. And a lot of that is driven by culture and cultural values. So how are these processes helping support the not only integration of diverse populations, but that they thrive, that they have the resources they need to elevate their voice, that their voice is heard, and that they feel seen and engaged. If they are in that meeting in a room full of men or non-binary or neurodiverse individuals, is everyone in that room being heard and seen? Are the resources available to everyone in that room adapted to help each person feel like they are engaged and participating effectively?
That's great. Loren, there's kind of a controversial topic, but I might as well pick your brain. How do we eliminate this almost new I don't want to say bias, but new hatred towards a certain group, right? You hear a lot of critique of white men, old white men, as being like the pariah group, right? You start seeing this more and more often. How do we get rid of that kind of hatred I'm almost seeing forming, right, in result of what's happened over the last few years? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say, do you ever get rid of it? I think that you could mitigate it, right? Human behavior is a funny thing. You can certainly provide the tools they need to understand. That's one. But this is where your systems almost create like a stopgap or a fail-safe mechanism to prevent this from escalating or creating a toxic environment, right? And it starts with understanding, moving towards making sure, again, that those systems in place, in the context of the workplace, of course, making sure that the systems in place don't enable that sentiment, right? That leaders are equipped with the tools they need to mitigate that, in spite of their personal opinion, is again going back to how those different systems connect to build a culture where people themselves send the message that it's not allowed, not a policy or a statement in the handbook, but that this is embodied. You may have your personal opinions, but in this capsule, we are this, and this is what we embody. And that creates a space where it has no room for hatred.
Love that. Another topic that I've spoken about is I didn't realize ageism as a young person. I didn't realize ageism was such a thing as well. And so I had to start educating because people would talk about it very, very openly. Like, yeah, I don't want anyone, past their 40s. And I would say, why? You know
Why?
how it is. I'm like, I don't know how it is. Can you explain? And you realize how much nonsense there was. And so I had such a great example. I would say, listen, can I be honest with you? Some of the folks that I have in their 50s and 60s will run circles around you. Be very careful. They're mentally, physically, emotionally healthier than you. Physically, including physically. I have 65-year-olds here that work for us that run 3 miles a day, that are healthier. They miss less work. They're more focused. They're more growth oriented because people are fear, well, they're going to retire in a year or two. I don't want to invest. I don't know who you're talking to, but none of the folks in the 60s in our companies have any interest in retiring anytime soon. Even if they do, they will go until the last minute, until they can't anymore. So that's another big one that I noticed. There was this like almost accepted biased that these folks are not going to be capable long term, and it was nonsense.
Yes, I agree. It is nonsense. A 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old today is not 60-year-old from, 3 years ago, not even 5 years ago. These are people who, to your point, are very, very capable, if not more capable. We need this group in the workplace because,
Desperately.
the younger employees, they are fantastic, fast paced, they're innovative, they're,
Mm-hmm.
embrace technology and da da da. But they missed out, particularly the younger generation that has just come out of college, especially within the COVID period, the pandemic
Yeah.
period, that missed out the social aspect
Yes.
of the workplace, right? They had to graduate from school virtually. And so, these generations, they learn from each other. There are a couple of people I interviewed for my book that have this dynamic, whereas the person, from the older generation was so interested in technology and interested in learning from the younger generation, was just a little bit more risk averse because
Mm-hmm.
of their history. Whereas the younger employee, relied on this person for their intellect, for their knowledge of the trajectory that technology has had, even within the last 10 years. And so here you have two polar opposites, or seeming polar opposites, that have connected through understanding and learned to see those differences as their superpower.
Love
And they
that.
used it as such. So to your point, I think that we're missing out on this generation
Big time.
big time.
Big time.
Hmm.
Lucky for Heart we are not. And it's
Thank
really nice to
gosh.
see. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. And no one talks about that diversity, right? There's that piece never is discussed, but we proudly talk about how we have folks in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. I mean, that alone is diversity, right? I mean, because you have
Absolutely.
different cultures, Gen Zs, millennials, Xers, baby boomers, all these different folks teaching each other different things. It's extremely powerful, and it's frankly a lot of fun. There's a lot of
It
humor.
is.
Just even like when someone talks about an era and you see the blank stares and you have to educate them on what Nintendo or Atari is, it's hilarious.
Well,
Or
imagine me when
fax
I mentioned
machines.
Y2K. They're like, "What?
Yeah, what the hell is
What do you mean
Y2K?
Armageddon?" I'm like, "Well, have a seat.
Yeah, have a
Let's
seat.
let's talk."
Let's talk. I love it. You talked about interesting word, neurodivergence. Educate us on what that actually means.
Neurodivergence just, represents the different ways that people think. And it's a wide pool thanks to the societal definition of these different terms. But, it's another aspect that is not seen, certainly not heard, particularly, for example, those with ADD, or those with autism, right? There are all of these different neurodivergent categories, because they have to be for medical reasons, have their spectrum. You may have people that fall in the early or later part of the spectrum, and yet you may work with that person and not know ever that they are, part of this diverse group. And so going back to that culture aspect, and having a culture where people feel um, seen and heard, involves creating a culture where people feel comfortable talking about it. I myself, everyone has always seen me as someone who is definitely eclectic, certainly creative and innovative, but no one really knew that I had ADD until just a few years ago, when I, again, the learned individual, uh, who's the head of global HR and thinking, yes, let's be inclusive of everyone, I was afraid to talk about it. So, creating a space where, people feel seen and heard includes this group who's also falling by the wayside. You mentioned ageism. But this is another group that is just now starting to have a voice and to articulate that loud and clear whenever they need. But there's still a fundamental fear of talking about it.
Nice, very good. Nick asked me to specifically ask a question that's important to him. His curiosity is around HR and how it's always been HR is for the company, is how it's looked, right? It's not for the employees, or from what I've seen, it leans too heavily for the people and not enough for the company. So that's interesting. That's how he looks at it. Why should employees trust HR staff who's protecting the company as their number one priority?
Yeah, I would say its number one priority is to protect the company, which is its people, right? A lot of times it's misconstrued, because I have witnessed, and I can attest to this, HR departments that are cookie cutter and just focused on protecting not the company, the CEO, right? Or the policies, or whatever law has just been enacted. People-centered HR, people and culture is very different in that when you are having to uphold these laws, these policies, and blah, 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 you need to make sure you come at this from a design thinking approach, right? What is that end user going to think about what you're doing, and what do they need in order to support this new law or policy? It's not about not enacting it. It's about making sure that you're coming at it from the lens of a human being. If it's, I remember COVID was an absolute nightmare because, particularly in the United States, no two states would communicate, let alone communicate with the federal government. Yet we had to comply with state rules and regulations that, sometimes contradicted the human side behind human resources. But our narrative, our message was exactly that. It was, this is the law, this is how it applies to you, and this is how the organization supports you in complying with this law, right? So it's about the delivery, not necessarily the policy or the law has just been passed. Unfortunately for HR, they are at the mercy of many of those laws that require for them to, sometimes I'll say it, become inhuman resources. But it's up to HR, human resources, to make sure that employees understand the reasoning, the nuance, and the implications of not complying with that law.
That's awesome. This has been great, Loren. Where can people find you? Where can they, reach out to you, follow you, and learn more?
Absolutely. You can go to my website, lorenrosario.com, or you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I love my LinkedIn community, Loren Rosario-Maldonado. And you can learn more about me and my work through there as well.
Awesome. Loren, thank you so much for being here and teaching us so many new concepts, especially cultural intelligence and how to apply it to the workplace. Appreciate you, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Avetis. I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us and hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but it also helps others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. Remember, a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm Avetis Antaplyan, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.